council meeting Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. Please join, or hold on a second. Roll call. All members are present. Alderman Tierney is joining us by phone. Please join with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Tierney is joining us by phone. Please join with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Looking for approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or concerns on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, hearing none, let's get into mayor's business. A couple of quick updates here. First, school started today, so I just want to thank our crossing guards who are city employees and do their best to bring both joy as you drive past them in the morning and keep our children safe, particularly back in the old days, Jerry and Smiley up at the top of St. Mary's Hill, and I think our favorite guy over at TJ who will step in front of a moving vehicle and has no fear in order to help those kids. So he's a pretty awesome guy. So please thank them. And then, of course, parents and kids. If you didn't know, school started today. The last two things are just a thank you to the Kiwanis Club and our harbor and our marina staff for putting on the Venetian Day and doing all of those different pieces. I know we've got a couple of those members up here on the desk with us, so I appreciate that and all that was done to make Port Washington look fantastic on Sunday. And then also just want to send out a big thank you again, both first to the council for approving the funds of shifting the dollars to give them to Main Street, which then created Paint on Port for the different murals that emerged. Literally in a 2-week period of time, Port Washington became a destination for what was blighted sides of buildings and walls. And now our community is glow with that. So both that character and that color coming to Port Washington is fantastic. And I'm excited that they've got a lot more going on for that. And then stay tuned because I've gotten some movement on some sculptures and I'm going to Park and Rec for that. And that's it. So the other two pieces under mayor's business is we've got the appointment of the city attorney through the term of April of 2025. You saw that we had renegotiated the terms of our agreement with that, and that was very much to both parties' liking. So I'd be looking for a motion to approve that appointment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second. Any questions or concerns on the motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, and then the second one is consideration and possible action on an appointment of a successor agent at the Twisted Willow. Susan, do you want to add to that, or does anyone have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions? This is just a replacement for an individual who has left their employment there, so it's required for every establishment to have this in place in order to operate.
Pretty standard stuff.
Move to approve.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and second. Any questions or concerns? All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, those smoke-infused Manhattans will be served tonight. All right, and there's nothing under officer and staff reports. That moves us into public comments and appearances. Are there any public comments or appearances for the council tonight? Any public comments or appearances? Any public comments or appearances?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you please state your name and address? And you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, my name is Joe Burke, and I live in West Michigan Street. So I just wanted to talk about the closed session. I know you guys can't talk about it, but just some things to consider while thinking about it. I'd just like to talk about like projected tax value, something to look at. Also, like when the certain deadlines are going to be for this development, and also those are the two things. Yeah, wanted to make it quick and short and sweet. But yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you, Joe. Any other public comments? All right, seeing none, then we're going to move into item number 7 from standing committees and council committees, General Government and Finance Committee, consideration of possible action on the Port Washington Fire Department organizational structure. The issue is, should the city modify the organizational structure of the Port Washington Fire Department to address the existing and projected service demand increases? Staff recommends the Common Council, as does committee, that we approve the staff recommendation and take the necessary steps to move forward with the new hybrid Port Washington Fire Department option to enhance the organizational framework of the Port Washington Fire Department. Mr. Brown, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this has been a long time coming, probably a couple years in the making. So what we'll do is I won't go through every single little piece because we'd be sitting here for probably at least 45 minutes. Instead, Deputy Chief DeBoer will go through a presentation that will take no longer than 25 minutes. And he will go through a series of different pieces. But I think probably the most important part to think about here is that we did talk about this in February and March, and it was the fact that there are both existing and future challenges that the city is going to face, and it's really all about the call volume as that relates to not only development growth, but the aging population that the city has currently. So with that, I will turn it over to Deputy Chief DeBoer.
All right, good evening, everybody. It's been a while since we've done this presentation, so, all right. Yeah. Yeah, this is meant to be more interactive, so if you have any questions, please stop me halfway through. All right, so I think before we kind of move on to what we need in the future, it's good to take a quick look back. The fire department was actually founded in 1852 after two large fires in 1851. If you burn down a flour mill and a hotel in the same year, your village board gets upset, and they drafted an ordinance to provide for, quote, security against fire. So interestingly, the ambulance service kind of has a, sorry, my clicker's not moving here. There we go. The ambulance service kind of has a little bit of a interesting startup. In 1947, the Ozaki Trades and Labor Council undertook a 2-year fundraising effort of selling pencils to get the first ambulance for the city of Port Washington. It took 2 years for them to raise the money and train the staff, and the first ambulance was housed at the water filtration plant. In 2011, our ambulance service upgraded from an advanced EMT service to a paramedic service, meaning we now carry over 40 medications where we were carrying 8 to 10 as an advanced EMT service. In 2004, from a staffing standpoint, we hired our first full-time chief. And with increasing call volume and the need for additional paramedic staffing, kind of a familiar tone, in 2019, we hired our first full-time firefighter paramedic. We've had a couple come and go since then, but in 2023, so earlier this year, with the Ozaki County ARPA grant funding, the department was able to hire 2 additional firefighter paramedics, bringing us up to 3 full-time firefighter paramedics and a full-time deputy chief. That's me. Yes, sir.
Can you go back to that picture?
Absolutely.
What year is that snorkel?
1968.
That was a big deal when I was a kid.
We've got all kinds of
But that was the biggest engine or
Does
truck
this
in the
count against
city.
my 25 minutes?
Nope.
All right, just checking.
Nope. Chief?
Recall that the kids on bicycles could beat it up the hill.
Yeah.
It had a very
But not
good
down.
powered motor.
It
Joe, you've
still
got
exists
12
somewhere,
minutes
right?
left.
All right, so this is what our current membership looks like. We talked about we have 5 full-time employees. Chief Mitchell and myself work a 40-ish hour week. And then we have the 3 firefighter paramedics that work rotating 24-hour shifts. We have a total of 42 part-time employees. 21 of them only do fire, 14 of them only do EMS, and we have 7 that do both fire and EMS. And this is kind of what our current organizational structure looks like. We have the chief on top and a paid-on-call or part-time assistant chief. On the left, you'll see what our daily staffing looks like. So think of that as that 3-day rotation. We have a full-time firefighter paramedic on each of those days, and that's supplemented with either a paid-on-call paramedic or a paid-on-call EMT or both. And we should have 3. We're missing 1 on the box there. If there's a fire call for service, that's when the paid on call staff or the other side of the chart starts showing up. We have paid on call chiefs that are responsible for safety and training. We have paid on call captains that are kind of fire officers. We have an EMS captain and an EMS lieutenant, engineers who drive the trucks, and paid on call firefighters. All of those are part-time employees. They're not stationed in the station. They respond from home if there's a call. Any questions about kind of how it's set up? Take a mental image of this because it'll be important in the future. All right. So what do we need to change, or why is this important? In 2021, the Wisconsin Policy Forum completed a survey to evaluate the fire and EMS services across Ozaukee County. They found that all of the departments were kind of in the same boat when it came to staffing. And they found specifically Port Washington was stretched thin the most because of our central location, meaning we were called for mutual aid by more places, north, south, and west. And we were providing paramedic intercepts. So we were kind of hit the hardest with some of the staffing problems. So why are we having staffing problems? Well, a lot of it has to do with call volume. The easiest way to explain the increase in call volume is our population growth. We've seen a 9.3% increase in our population since 1980. And by 2050, we're expected to add between 2,700 and 5,400 more residents to our city. Okay? When you couple that with the aging part of our population, that's a recipe for disaster for EMS. 21% of Ozaukee County residents are over the age of 65. That's higher than most counties. And that number is expected to balloon to 27% by 2040. So we're going to see a more increase in that population. That group accounts for 63% of our EMS calls. So as our population continues to age and grow, we're going to see more and more calls for service. And really, it's the EMS calls that are driving the bus. 86% of the fire department's business is EMS related. Only 14% is fire related, and I would argue that's probably closer to 90-10 because some of the fire related calls for service are actually EMS assist. So if we're at a cardiac arrest call, we'll call the fire department for manpower, or a lift assist, we'll call the fire department for manpower. And those technically count as fire calls. And you can kind of march that out since 2012. Look at our increase in call volume. It's almost a 7% increase in call volume year over year over year. Last year we did 1,485 EMS calls. We're on track to do 1,550 this year. And if you look back from 2012, that's a huge increase. And when you chart that out over time, by 2032, we could be doing almost 3,000 EMS calls a year. That is not sustainable in the system that we have. It's not sustainable. The call volume that we have now is not sustainable in the system that we have. To illustrate that point, this is from 2022. I'm happy to report that our numbers have been better in 2023. They're not perfect, but they're better. In 2022, 40% of the days overall, we were missing a staffed ambulance for at least 6 hours. Meaning if you called 911 for help in that 6-hour window, you're going to get an ambulance from Grafton or Saukville or Fredonia or from wherever. And on weekends, because we're staffed with part-time employees, and who wants to work weekends, nights, and holidays at a part-time job, that number ballooned to 54%. Between February 2022 and August of 23, we called mutual aid because we couldn't staff an ambulance 276 times. Meaning we couldn't fulfill the request for somebody who dialed 911 expecting an ambulance for Port Washington to show up 276 times. This is what that looked like. If you look at a calendar of 2022, all those days, and I know it's a little hard to read with the exclamation points, all of those were days that we didn't have a staffed ambulance. So traditionally, our ambulance was staffed by paid-on-call responders, meaning they got in their car, drove to the station, got in the ambulance, went to the call. As the demands for what it takes to become an EMT or a paramedic increased and our staffing model changed, we saw less and less paid-on-call responders from an EMS standpoint. Last year, it was about 14% of our EMS responders were working in a paid-on-call capacity. It's down to 6% already this year. meaning 94% of our calls are covered by people that are doing paid on premise, meaning they're in the station ready to go, or full-time employees. So it's more of a job than a volunteer culture from an EMS standpoint. And 1%, and if you look at that 6%, one guy covers half of that. So those numbers are pretty startling. So NFPA sets forward response time recommendations for an ALS response, so meaning the most critical EMS calls. It expects that an ambulance is on scene in no less than 8 minutes. We're doing better. We're hitting that benchmark about 62% of the time, but that still means about 40% of the time it's taken longer than 8 minutes for us to get there. If you saw the article in the press a couple of weeks ago, you saw how important response times are. On scene of a cardiac arrest in a few minutes, and the patient was able to present everybody an award at the Police and Fire Commission last week. So response times are really important to what we do. And having staff in the station, that is the best way to improve our response times. And just to demonstrate some of that, by adding even just partial paid on-premise staffing, we've decreased our response times in 5 years by 35%. Well, since 2020, we've decreased it by 35% just by our paid on-premise program. Another thing that's important to remember, that as our call volume goes up, so do our simultaneous calls for service, meaning the ambulance is already out on a call, we get another one that comes in at the same time. These numbers look low, but I think they're underreported because of what we kind of refer to as turn and burn calls. Meaning our ambulance is out at the hospital dropping a patient off, they respond directly from the hospital, or, so they're at Aurora Grafton or they're at St. Mary's Ozaki, and respond lights and sirens back from there. I'm sure you can imagine the response time difference if you're responding from St. Mary's Ozaki versus responding from our station here. It's also stressful for the crew because you're kind of trying to put together the ambulance on the way back from another call. There's some, when you look at what we have to do if we can't staff that, it's calling mutual aid. 61% of the time that we have a simultaneous call, we can't staff it. So it's going to one of those departments. And, from a quality of work and kind of burnout perspective for our paramedics, we're running almost a 50-50 split of ALS, meaning high acuity calls that require paramedic level skills, versus BLS calls, which are kind of our lower acuity calls. If you compare that to other municipalities, especially in busier cities that see higher volumes, that percentage is completely altered, meaning they're running a lot more BLS, or kind of the lower acuity calls, and a lot fewer ALS calls. So, the mental exertion that it takes to run a BLS call is a lot less than if you're trying to think through drugs and do pediatric dosing, so on and so forth. So when you're the only paramedic running almost, 50% or more ALS calls for service, that's taxing on a 24-hour shift. And this is just not an EMS-related issue, although that's kind of what's driving the bus. Our paid-on-call fire staff is starting to age out a little bit. If you look at the average age of a current paid-on-call firefighter, it's 45. Only 2 firefighters, or paid-on-call firefighters on our department, are less than the age of 30, and 8 of them are over the age of 50. The guys that are over the age of 50 are kicking the young guys' butts as far as responding to calls and taking those over. They accounted for 45% of the responses last year. But if you fast forward 8 to 10 years, are those 8 guys still going to be on the department? And where do we make that up when we're not seeing that influx of new population? And there's a lot of things that go into this. I think the world is different than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Kids are in sports where they're practicing 4 or 5 times a week. People are working second jobs. Their first jobs are demanding more of them. But another thing to consider is the educational requirements of what goes into becoming a paid-on-call firefighter, EMT, or a paramedic. It's not impossible to convince somebody to become a paid-on-call firefighter. There's no prerequisites. The class is long, it's 112 hours, but there's no clinical time and there's no continuing education requirement set forth by the state. It's a little bit harder to convince somebody to become an EMT. That's 180 hours of didactic and practical training. You have to do 10 field contacts, which is not super difficult to do. And you have to do 30 hours of continuing every 3 years. I'd like to know who we can sign up to be a volunteer paramedic. That's a 1,200-hour course with 400 hours of clinical time and 48 hours of continuing education every year. The person volunteering to take that, oh, and that's after you took the EMT class. So you already got your 180 hours of EMT basic in. It's not realistic for us to expect to find paid on call or volunteer paramedics anymore. So what are departments around us doing? So this is a list of departments or municipalities around us that were part of our comparison study that was done. I think the most important column is the one on the end, where you're looking at EMS calls per FTE. If you look at Watertown and Germantown or Beaver Dam or Cudahy, they're running less than 100 calls per full-time position. Port Washington, we're doing almost 300 calls per full-time position. That's higher than anybody on this list, and it's not super close, except for Hartford. Okay. And if you dig back through the Wisconsin Policy Forum survey, and look at this chart, department operating expenditures per capita, we're spending the second least per capita for fire and EMS services, despite being the second busiest department in the county. And again, not super close. And if you look at Cedarburg, they're kind of a unique model where they have a firemen's association that buys their apparatus and vehicles and those type of things. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison there. So what is our recommendation? The first thing that we wanted to consider is a couple of things together. First, the ongoing success of our department depends on the continued participation of our part-time and paid-on-call staff. Meaning this is not going to work unless we retain our committed part-time and paid-on-call employees. We have a ton of highly skilled, highly motivated firefighters and EMTs, and our success is 100% dependent on them going forward. But we also are realistic enough to realize that we need more full-time help to help supplement those positions. There's just no way around it anymore. And third, it was really important to us to protect the identity and the traditions of our department. But we had to keep in mind that the community comes first. What's best for the department is after that, and then what's best for our individuals is after that. So, we took some time to sit down with our fire department personnel, explain to them kind of what we're proposing to make sure everybody had a chance to see all of this before you guys did. So, does everybody remember this? We put it up a couple slides ago. This is our current organizational structure. This is what we're looking for. What this adds is a part-time risk reduction specialist, 3 full-time lieutenant paramedic positions, and 3 full-time firefighter paramedic positions to supplement the awesome staff that we currently have. So what do those positions do? So the lieutenant paramedic positions would be working a rotating shift. They would be responding to fire and EMS calls for service. They would be responsible for mentoring and training our new staff, overseeing daily training and other station activities, participating in our QA/QI program. The firefighter paramedics also would be working a rotating shift, just like our current guys, completing station responsibilities, responding to calls, anything that we kind of ask of them. The risk reduction specialist might be the position that nobody kind of has heard about or known. It's a fancy title for a position that's been along for a long time. This would be a part-time 20-hour-a-week position that would be responsible for completing fire inspections, assisting with plan review to ensure code compliance, and then they would be the go-to for prevention education programs with businesses, schools, other interested parties. So they would kind of be our community outreach person. Does anybody have any questions about the positions or how it fits into the structure? No? Okay. Yeah.
Real briefly, what does that add to the budget annually?
We will get there in just a second, sir. In fact, we will get there right now.
This is where I jump in. So as it stands currently, I think probably the most significant thing to note for 23 and 24 is that one of the most significant revenue sources is ARPA funds. So we get roughly $100,000 that we use out of the local city amount for one position. And then $200,000 is roughly $200,000 is for two county funded positions. And that will run through the end of the year. Originally, the plan for that was a little bit different in that the county EMS grants program ran 3 years from 23 to 25, and we were to get $200,000 in each of those years. But it's looking like with the current recommendation, it will be a total of $400,000, and it has to be spent by the end of next year. Then moving forward, once you get to 2025, what you see is the impact of adding those positions. So the budget roughly goes up about $720,000. And then at the same time, you're seeing that revenue decrease because the ARPA funds have been exhausted. So there's a gap of approximately $975,000. And as the years go on, 26, 27, 28, you see a normal or relatively normal increase based on not only the STEP system that's identified for paramedic firefighters, but also just some of the fringe benefits that go along with being a full-time employee. So what we're looking here moving forward would be a referendum to raise approximately $1 million by increasing the levy by that amount. Happy to answer any questions about that. Otherwise, Deputy Chief is going to go through some of the benefits of this hybrid model.
Any questions on the financials at this time? Okay, Chief?
All right. So
Deputy
what are
Chief.
we getting for that? So first and foremost, it provides a longer-term answer to a complex staffing problem that focuses on maintaining both our paid on-premise and our paid on-call staff. Again, like I said before, they are critically essential to the future success of our department. If you guys remember back to some of the conversations about consolidation and the structure that would look like, it added a lot of administrative positions. Our goal is to really focus on boots on the ground, where it matters most, the operational staff. The positions that we are adding, almost all of them are boots on the ground, responding to calls, taking care of business for us. What that does for us is it allows us to have a second ambulance and an engine staffed, depending on the call type, almost 24/7, 365, which is something I can't promise you today. Another benefit, for our paid on-call or staff is this really opens up our training schedule. Right now, our trainings are the second and fourth-ish Monday of the month at 7 o'clock. So if you work second shift or you work odd hours, you really can't be part of the fire department. There's a lot of people in the community that work those shifts and potentially have something to give back to us. This would allow us to have a very flexible schedule because we could do training during the day because we have enough staff in the station to do that training for them. So it gives us a chance to add some more paid on-call and part-time members. Okay. And it also allows us some flexibility of hiring firefighter EMTs if we choose, in addition to the firefighter paramedics. That would be ideal for us to identify homegrown talent. We have a lot of really talented people in the fire department that are looking to further their education. So this would give us the opportunity to really vet those people ahead of time and make sure that we're hiring the right people that are going to be here long term and take care of us. And this also provides some resiliency for our current full-time staff. They have great medical leave, sick days, and vacation time right now. The problem is they can't use them. There's only 3 guys that work on a rotation. So if one of them wants to take time off, that relies on the other two guys to fill that shift. I don't think anybody exclusively wants to work 48 hours in a row most of the time. They do it to cover each other, but it gets hard to do, and it makes it difficult for those guys to take long vacations if they wanted to. We saw it earlier this year. One of our firefighter paramedics had a child. Going on medical leave was tough for us to get covered because there was just vacant shifts that we couldn't get covered. And it also would allow our current staff to attend the continuing education that's important for them for career advancement. We want these guys to be highly trained firefighters. We want them to take advanced classes. We want them to be able to drive the apparatus, do inspections, further their education. They can't do that if there's nobody to cover their shift. We can't take the ambulance out of service for them to go to class, so we need to figure out a way to make sure there's some sustainability for them to take those classes. So what do the next steps look like, Tony?
So really what we're asking tonight of this group is really three things. To direct staff to start developing a referendum question for the spring 2024 election. To also develop a communications plan and marketing plan for this. And maybe taking a step back for the referendum question, we would anticipate in the next, I would say, month and a half, coming back to this body with that question, both at the committee level and to this group for consideration. For the communications and marketing plan, one of the options that we will certainly evaluate is bringing on Miller Communication to assist us in the efforts to develop that plan. They're the same firm that helped us with the communications audit. And then the third thing is just continuing to look at the budget model and adjust it according to what the conditions are. So if I was to really boil this down to kind of substantively, what's the real big policy question? It's really, what is the service level that the community expects and at what cost? So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions, but the recommendation would be to move forward with the hybrid plan. And the motion would be, I move that the Common Council endorse the proposed hybrid staffing model and direct staff to initiate the process for a spring 2024 referendum to ask the public to support a levy increase for the required funding in the hybrid model, or motion to accept staff's recommendation.
Any questions or concerns? Mr. Sigwart?
Tony, you said something about the presidential election. Was that just a misspoke?
I don't think I said the presidential election, but the spring 2024 election.
The general election in spring. Jonathan or Mr. Pleitner?
Thank you. Yeah, I like that we've started this conversation by talking about how of a multi-year process this has been. I think we've exhausted all other options, and I think if we want to continue to support and provide public safety to our citizens, I think this is a necessary next step.
Alderwoman Postel?
As you were talking about the difficulty in getting the firefighters and EMTs trained, I was thinking what it would be like to be in that position, having new equipment or new procedures or new policies and not having been trained and trying to keep the public safe. I would not want to be in that position. And I think this hybrid model is probably the best thing that I've seen in the 5 years that I've been sitting up here, and I fully support it.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that I've had the opportunity over the past several years to work with these folks and understand some of the challenges and the data that goes behind it. I've also had and taken the opportunity to talk to chiefs and firefighters in other communities in our county and heard and seen what they're trying to do to address the situation, because everybody's experiencing the limitations of part-time and people not volunteering. So I feel very strongly that what the team has put together, the data they've looked at, is the right answer for Port Washington going forwards. And I think our safety of our citizens is critical. And this is the model that we're going to have to implement as soon as possible. And I'm all in with these guys and making sure this referendum passes next spring.
Is that a motion?
And I'll make a motion that we accept staff's recommendation.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alderman Postle. Any questions or concerns on the motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Excellent. I just wanted to add after the motion here, because I see our chair of the Police and Fire Commission, I have a wondering for you to bring back to PFC, and that is how long before we are having the same conversation about the police department? And wondering if there's a way to expedite a potential study or plan to see how we can proactively make sure we're staffing the police department at the same time. Because I don't want to position the city to have to go to 2 safety referendums year after year for operational costs. And then I know by December 5th, we'll see the impact on mill rate before we make those decisions. So this is a big first step, but it's not the final step, just to make sure people. So chiefs, thank you very much for your presentation and diligence on this. It's going to be good for the city of Port Washington, but I've had that wondering since we started this conversation because those two have to be in lockstep, and if we grow, we're going to have calls on both sides of the aisle there. So
Absolutely.
thank you. Well done, Joe.
Thank you.
It was 27 minutes, by the way. No, I gave you that. I gave you 2 minutes in there, brother. And I could care less because there's nothing more important to talk about than this. Except for the consideration and possible action on the 2024 budget philosophy. And I do want to thank Chair Pleitner for this because this is something I had asked him to consider to bring to the Finance Committee. I do believe that it's important for the city, us as a council, to, from the start, inform staff of this is the philosophy and this is our expectations as you build the budget. So, Mr. Pleitner, I'm going to turn it over to you because you helped craft and walk this through committee.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is long overdue. I think the Finance Committee, now the General Government and Finance Committee, we approach the annual budget every year, sort of just trying to get ourselves where services are kept maintained. But I think it's well worth it to, having completed the strategic plan for the city, having a firm direction of where the city's headed, I think this is well warranted. So I thank the other members of the committee and the staff in helping me draft this. So to that end, I would read this. The City of Port Washington believes that the annual budget should be developed using a conservative spending approach, prioritizing public safety infrastructure for its residents. Special emphasis will be given to sustainability, responsible strategic thinking, employee retention, and capital improvements that allow us to live within our revenues. Taxpayer money will be spent in the most cost-effective and efficient way possible. All efforts will be made to restrict our debt levels and support our citizens' quality of life. Thank you.
I like how it tailed off there a little dramatically. That was very nice. I'm serious. Here's my request for us as we build the budget when it comes back to council. There are multiple measures that were built into this statement: sustainability, responsible strategic thinking, employee retention, and capital improvements. And I think when the budget is finalized, after you guys have run through it, if we could demonstrate that in that final presentation to us and the community, here's where we have done our diligence, and the conservative spending approach prioritizing public safety and infrastructure for our residents. That's totally in alignment with our needs. So
That's a good point. I think
well done, everyone.
all those things had come through in the city survey that we had done just passed recently. Like, these are important things to the city that we'll focus on. So that's a good call. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, it creates a key performance indicator for the budget process. So
Thank you.
any questions or concerns on the work that was done by committee? Thoughts or ideas?
Just if I could offer a quick thought or something that occurs to me. When we talk about infrastructure, do we maybe, and this, I don't think we need to send it back or anything. I'm going to vote for this if we need to. But when we talk about infrastructure, we're talking roads. Obviously, we're talking roads, streets, plumbing, all that. But what are are there other aspects of the infrastructure? Parks. Is parks part of an infrastructure? Is the library part of an infrastructure?
Yep, absolutely. I would say yes, Alderman Turney. I think one thing that we had done just this past year that I think Streets Commissioner Hoyle had compiled a compendium of all of our city infrastructure, buildings, vehicles, all those things. So yes, those would absolutely be a part of this philosophy.
And I think what we could do
Okay,
is,
thank you.
yeah, and Alderman Turney, I think what we could do is we could ask staff when they put it together to put a core definition behind the words infrastructure. so that we have a core definition. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mr. Pleitner, would you like to make any motions?
I would move to approve the 2024 City of Port Washington budget philosophy.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I would second it.
Oh, sorry, Pat, you're on 3-second tape delay. Alderwoman Postle got the second. All right, there's a motion and a second. Any questions or concerns on the motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Again, I'm very, very grateful for this. All right, we're moving into section 8 from the city boards and commissions from the Planning Commission. Ordinance 2023-16, request to rezone 2 parcels totaling approximately 96 acres of land located west of Stonecroft Drive, north of Cara Estates subdivision from AG Agricultural District to RS3 Single Family Detached Residence District. Belgium Farms LLC by Anze Development is the applicant. And the recommendation is this time is there isn't one because this is a first reading only, but coming out of the Planning Commission, this did pass unanimously. Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not too much to add at this point after your summary, but the city did receive a petition to rezone those 2 parcels. They are abutting one another and total approximately 96 acres of land. They are located directly west of Stonecroft Drive and the Stonecroft condominium development and north of Cara Estates. The rezoning for that parcel is for RS3. Quick background, this is holdover land from what is commonly known as the former VK development lands, so it still retains its AG Ag zoning because that development did not get to the final zoning stage. There is no development accompanying this rezoning request. The applicants have stated they just simply want to rezone the land in accordance with the city's recently updated land use plan and position that land for future marketing and future development. As noted, this came out of Plan Commission with a unanimous recommendation of the council to rezone to RS3. This is a first reading, so no action is expected tonight from the council.
And just as chair of the Planning Commission, we applauded the density and the vision for what this property is going to bring to the city of Port Washington. So thank you again for that to the developers and their family. Mr. Pleitner?
Yeah, really briefly, I see that there's some environmental corridor, some wetlands perhaps in there. Ian, can you tell me of that 96 acres, how much of that is environmental or protect? It's a fun question.
Good evening, everybody. To answer the question, there's out of the 96, I don't have a specific number, but it's roughly a third. There's some good amount of land to the west end, and then some wet areas. I'd say a safe guess is about a third, Jonathan.
Any other questions? It's good when it's 96 acres because the third is easy math then, right?
I got
Mr. Gasper?
yeah, a question probably for Bob, actually. The parcel description references a certified survey map, which usually we have included on these. Would it be possible to get a copy of the CSM, being kind of a map geek?
We can do that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this first reading? Anything that we need to review before the next council meeting then? All right. All right, Ian, thanks for coming tonight for that agenda item.
Thanks for your time, everybody.
All right, next piece is, new business. Presentation by the city auditor on the fiscal year 2022 City of Port Washington audit. Or did we order a John's Pizza?
I certainly appreciate the enthusiasm.
We should have, yeah. Well, it's the audit, man. This tells us how we're doing. So welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Brown.
So in your packet is the management letter along with the financial statements. So Brian Grunwald of CLA, who is the lead of the audit team, will go through the results. And I think you'll be happy with kind of where we landed for performance last year. I'll turn it over to Brian.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you for having me here this evening. As Tony mentioned, both the documents, the audit documents he referred to, are included in the packet. If anyone has any questions on those documents as I'm going through this, please feel free to ask. This is intended to be a pretty high-level overview. So again, if you want to take a deeper dive in anything, please let me know. The first couple slides, I just wanted to point out some of the audit results. Included within your financial statements, there's actually two different auditor's reports. The first is on pages 1 through 4. It's titled as the Independent Auditor's Report on the basic financial statements. That is considered to be an unmodified opinion. Essentially means that I believe that your financial statements are complete and accurate and in accordance with our professional standards. And I also want to reiterate that that is the highest level of assurance that you can receive as part of the audit process. In addition, there is also an auditor's report on internal control. We do not issue an opinion on internal control, but as part of the audit process, we are required to gain an understanding of your processes, your procedures, and we use that for audit planning purposes in terms of how we design our tests and what we test. When we do become aware of what we refer to as findings, we're required to communicate those. So there is some language both in your audited financial statements and in the management communication letter that references a few findings. You'll see those on the slide here. Before I go through those, I do want to reiterate, but each of these items is a repeat finding, meaning we did have a similar finding for the prior year. And I'm just going to touch on each one of these very briefly. Again, if you want me to go take a deeper dive, I'd be happy to. The first finding there is references 2022-1, adjustments to the city's financial records. Just want to reiterate, as part of the audit process, we do work closely with Mark and your team. When we identify adjustments, we do share those with Mark. We do work together. We make sure that we're on the same page with regards to all audit adjustments. And those have been reviewed and approved by Mark and are included within the financial statements that you have in front of you this evening. The second item there, finding 2022-2, preparation of the annual financial report. The purpose of that is to disclose the fact that we, as your auditors, are also the ones who have prepared your financial statements. Very common in today's environment, repeat finding. Again, just disclosing that that condition exists.
Can I ask you a question? So you prepare that for us. Why does it then, will it be taken off as a finding in the following year?
No,
Or is it only if our treasurer prepares the financial?
It really truly would be in an environment where you're preparing that document. So in an ideal accounting environment, the organization would prepare that document. We would review it, provide our independent audit opinion. I just want to reiterate, from a practicality standpoint, we prepare the financial statements for the vast majority of the clients we serve. All cities of your size, we would typically be preparing the financial statement. For much larger organizations, such as a county, for example, they may have additional staff members where they may be preparing that document. So it's really a matter of efficiency and practicality as part of that as well. So, and I think the key with it is that we share drafts and make sure that we're on the same page before we issue a final document. Okay, and then just moving on to the last item there, references to segregation of duties. Again, as part of the audit process, we work through your internal controls. We look at how things are done, how you handle cash, how you pay your bills, how you process payroll, for example. Ideally, ideal accounting 101 type environment, we want to make sure that you have multiple people involved with those transaction cycles. Obviously, when you talk about things like turnover or vacation or leaves, does create some additional challenges with regards to segregation of duties. And because of that, we do have a comment with regards to segregation of duties.
Mr. Mayor, and I guess probably a question for Tony since Mark's not here. On those three, when I went through it, there's responses, at least on the first and the third one, but they're very vague as to what's going to be done. There's no definition of who's owning it, by what timeline they're going to address it, or anything specific. Will we be seeing something more specific on those controls?
I can add a little bit too if you want, Tony. Okay, so certainly from an audit standpoint, because of the document of where we're putting this, we typically put a very brief response included in there. My takeaway from this, and again, they're repeat findings, from talking to Mark on these, I think the items number 1 and 3 are probably going to be a little bit higher priority. Certainly when we work through something like adjustments, keep in mind of the timing of when Mark came in And the audit process covers the entire fiscal year, meaning we're looking back at a lot of information that was done before he was here. We've talked a lot about that. Mark has actually requested me to come in and sit down with him to go through those and just work through a game plan moving forward for 23. So I know that's on his radar. I'm not aware of a specific time frame, action plan, whatnot. And with regards to segregation of duties, I know I've also had discussions with Mark on that, so I know he's had thoughts about that. Again, I don't know specifically where he's at with regards to action plan, but I just wanted to mention that have had discussions with Mark on those.
I mean, the other thing I would add is if there is an interest in that being presented to either the General Government and Finance Committee or this body, we certainly can do that. But to date, we've talked about this as more of a staff-driven internal process thing that we're trying to improve versus really coming to a body of the council and discussing it.
I guess I'm just looking for more to know that somebody's owning these corrections to the controls, not how they're doing it or what, but somebody's owning it and got it on their radar.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I agree with both of you. I think for us to be above the line, what we should say is we want a zero finding audit. And then if not, then the committee determines why or how. And I appreciate you saying that communities our size, et cetera, but you can also have a community our size where we do prep our financials, and that changes the behavior of the entire staff then throughout the course of the year. So for whatever it's worth, I'm turning this off and you can keep going.
Sounds good. I don't know who has control of the slides. If we can move ahead. Okay, thank you. Okay, this next slide, included in your management communication letter, the first few pages of that, I'm going to refer to that as a governance letter. It includes information that we are required to communicate as part of the audit process. Therefore, when you get into that, the language, the terminology is all very standardized. The topics are consistent with what was presented in the past. And this slide just gives you a real brief overview of the majority of the topics that are included there. It's not all inclusive, but just wanted to give you a flavor for what's there. From my perspective, there's a couple of things that I just wanted to reiterate or highlight. In terms of accounting practices and policies, there are references to governmental accounting standards. It's referencing specifically what I'm referring to as GASB Statement Number 87. Very exciting stuff. I will say that we're implementing that as required, so all communities who are going through and having a governmental audit, we're required to do that as well, but you will see references to that standard throughout the audit documents. And then I just wanted to touch on audit adjustments. Again, just reiterating as part of the audit process, we do share that list of adjustments, work through that with Mark, and we've done that, and he has reviewed and approved that listing. So nothing else that I would consider to be a red flag or anything that's unusual in terms of communication. Okay. And then I just wanted to move into some of the key financial information. Again, this is going to be at a pretty high level, just focusing on your first few slides here, just focusing on your equity reserves. This one in particular is focusing on your general fund. I always like to look at history and trends. This slide shows you the history, the 5-year history of what your general fund balance or equity reserves have been. You can see how those have been increasing and built up over time. I'm just going to focus on 21 versus 22. At the end of 21, your total general fund balance reserves were $2,571,000. At the end of 2022, those did increase $123,000 up to $2,694,000. So you can see a slight increase as you look at the bar graph in comparing 2021 to 22. So I think that's certainly a takeaway, your overall trend, and the fact that for 2022, the cumulative effect of all of your revenues versus all of your expenses for your general fund, you did increase your fund balance or your equity reserves a little bit. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize as part of this slide is if you just focus on that unassigned category, and again, those categories are defined by our profession and professional standards, that unassigned category tends to get the most attention or scrutiny. And again, if you look at that balance over time, you can see how that's fluctuated and increased up from $1 million back in 2018 to 1.6 in 2021, and then up to 2.1 million for this year. So certainly that growth in your unassigned fund balance is certainly very positive as well. And from a benchmarking perspective, I'd just like to go to the next slide if we could. This next slide, the purpose of this is to focus on that unassigned fund balance for your general fund only, and to compare that to the size of your budget. So we do that by establishing a percentage And what you saw on the previous page was your unassigned fund balance dollars were increasing. And here too, you can see consistency with that. Your unassigned as a percentage of your budget or your actual expenditures has also been increasing, finishing 2022 at just over 21%. Again, certainly steady positive growth there. If I step back and think about policy and benchmarks, clearly see your policy talks about 20%, so you're slightly over that. If I think back to things like benchmarking and what we hear in our profession and our environment, being in that 20 to 25% range is certainly considered to be very strong financially. So certainly good news financially in terms of where your overall fund balance has been. Anything to add on that with regards to? Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do other communities build into ordinance their fund balance?
I would say for your size, they typically would have a guiding policy in terms of what they're working through. So I would say yes, there's typically some guidance out there.
Sure, but so we have internal working policy, but then do any communities have codified? Do we put it in our ordinance pack? We will maintain a 19 to 21%.
I think some do, some don't. I do
Okay.
feel that it's probably more internal policy. If I had a guess on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and then these next couple slides, just giving you a snapshot of your equity reserves, again, your fund balance reserves for some of your other funds. So I know there's a lot of information on here. This first slide is focusing on your special revenue funds and just giving you a snapshot of those reserves at the end of 22 versus the end of 21. Because of the amount of information on here, I'm just going to jump to the bottom. The total for all of your special revenue funds, you can see, was $1,960,000 at the end of 2021 versus $1.9 million at the end of 2022. Certainly, as you move through those different categories, a little bit of fluctuation based on timing and spending and whatnot. But just wanted to point out those reserves that are there. And then if we jump ahead, this next slide also gives you a real brief snapshot of your debt service fund and then also your capital projects fund. Here, what sticks out to me, and I know I've had some discussions with Mark on this, is your debt service fund. Those numbers are in brackets because you do have a deficit in that fund. You can see that has changed a little bit from 21 to 22, but again, that is in a deficit position. And then in the capital projects section, just keep in mind that capital projects funds do tend to fluctuate based on timing of when you may issue debt and have debt proceeds, for example, versus when you ultimately spend those debt proceeds. So heavily influenced by timing. And as a result of that, you can see your 2021 capital borrowing fund, for example, coming down as you're spending those remaining funds. 22 capital borrowing fund having $827,000 available at the end of the year. Two other highlights that I just wanted to point out real briefly. If you zone in the tax incremental district number 2 line, about the middle of the capital project section, you can see the increase in that fund. And then also at the end of that section, for those of you who last year, we did talk a little bit more about breakwater last year. You can see that did have a deficit of $872,000 at the end of 21, decreasing that deficit to $329 at the end of 22, as some of the grant funding has come in and the cash was received during 2022. And then also in addition, when we think of financial condition, certainly fund balance reserves are the most common metric or benchmark that people tend to focus on. I also like to take a look at your debt. Two things with this: if you focus on the blue line, that outstanding general obligation debt, and I do want to emphasize that is only general obligation debt. You do have other types of debt. You can see how that line has fluctuated from year to year. 2021, for perspective, you had approximately $29.4 million. After you consider the results of debt issues in 22 and debt repayments in 2022, you ended 2022 with about $31 million. So, overall, I see some fairly consistency with that blue line. And then you move into the statutory general obligation debt limit. That is based on the equalized value of the community. And as you talked about earlier, the growth in the community, your community has grown in terms of value, thus the red line increasing in terms of overall value. And then the last slide here, just wanted to touch real briefly on just looking forward. I know I talked a little bit about governmental accounting standards. I will say the standard setting body has been extremely busy. I talked a little bit about statement number 87 that we implemented for 2022. They're actually out to standard number 101, so there is a lot for us to digest. I just referenced GASB statement number 96 because it is one that is going to be applicable and effective for 2023. And I do think it is going to require a little bit more work and effort on Mark's part and our part. So we have shared information with Mark on that. And then we also have reference to another auditing standard that we'll be implementing. So certainly some things for us to work through. We'll continue to share information with Mark and again, make sure that those are properly implemented. And then the last thing, just wanted to touch briefly on ARPA. In terms of your ARPA funding, you may have noticed on the previous slides, there was a reference to your special revenue fund for ARPA and the amount of reserves left at the end of the year. Just want to reiterate that you also do have $1.2 million approximately in cash on hand at the end of 12/31/22. And when I think of ARPA and when I get questions on ARPA, the topics that come to my mind are things like compliance, eligibility, reporting. Yes, you get the benefit of having that money. Just keep in mind that there's some things that you need to do and be in compliance with regards to spending those money. Again, I know Mark is well aware of that. Just wanted to reiterate that as we move forward and provide some assurance that we'll be looking at that as we go through the audit process. So I know I went through that very briefly and very quickly. If anyone has any questions or concerns, certainly would be happy to address those. And I also do want to just take an opportunity to thank and recognize Mark. I certainly do not think it is easy to come into the audit process based on the timing of when he came on board. So I know we ask a lot of questions and ask for a lot of information, and keep in mind that a lot of that was from before he was actually joined the city. So certainly want to thank Mark and your team for the cooperation and assistance that we received throughout the audit process.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Frankly, I think that it's a blessing when you step into a new position and you're immediately under scrutiny for old practices, because it offers you the opportunity for rapid improvement in those processes. So I know that that's what happened in that office over there pretty quickly. And I also appreciate your diligence and patience with me on the questions. I just always wonder about, like, fund balances and, over taxation, or, why aren't we, and what those ratios are. So I also appreciate you putting in there some benchmarks, and I'm grateful for that. So, council, any other questions or comments? There's no motion on this. It's a report for information, and love to see that thing at 0 someday as a benchmark for Mark. So I'm sure that'll make him nervous, but okay. Brian, thank you
Sounds
very
good.
much. And we
Thank you very
appreciate the
much.
conciseness of your report.
Thank you.
Okay, that moves us into the last issue, last opportunity under new business, which is consideration and possible action on an attorney retainer agreement between Antoine Haft and Eberhardt and the city of Port Washington. The recommendation is to accept, to approve the retainer agreement with the law firm which clearly defines the scope of services provided to the city. The question is, should we or should we not? And Mr. Brown, you're up.
So this is a companion piece to the appointment that you all made earlier this evening. There are a few modifications to this agreement from last year. So what happened is that the prosecutor services got collapsed into the routine legal services. Also, the fee for non-routine legal services was increased from $230 to $250. And then we also wanted to make a note, or better recognize, that the city attorney, as well as being an independent contractor, is also a city officer. So the duration of this agreement is retroactive to August 1st and would run through May 1st of next year. And I made an error in the financial impact section and noted that it was $150,000. But since it is not for a full year, it is for roughly, I think it's 9 months, the fiscal impact would be $112,500. So with that, the recommended motion would be, I move that the attorney retainer agreement with Antoine Haft and Eberhardt be approved.
Any questions or concerns on the retainer, the agreement?
I would move to accept staff's recommendation on that.
Alderman Newmeyer has made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Plater. Any questions or concerns on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Any more public comments or appearances this evening? Any public comments or appearances? Any public comments or appearances? With that then, I have two separate closed session motions to make. First one is the motion to convene into closed session per Wisconsin State Statute 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, specifically for purposes of discussing and formulating negotiating strategies, including, without limitation, the terms and conditions for development of all or part of the approximately 39-acre parcel of the city-owned vacant land, commonly known as the former Shannon Farm, located along the south side of State Highway 33, approximately 1/4 mile west of County Highway LL tax parcel number, really big, 16-030-15-002-00. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Do I need roll call for this? I don't recall. Yes. I do. Okay, Ward 1? Ward 2? Aye. Ward 3? Aye. Ward 4? Aye. Ward 5? Aye. Ward 6?
Aye.
Ward 7? That motion passes unanimously. Second motion is to convene into closed session per Wisconsin State Statute 19.851C for the purpose of considering employment, promotion, compensation, and other terms and conditions of employment or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the government body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. I'm looking for a motion to approve that closed session. Alderman Alderman Newmeyer, is there a second?
Second.
Alderwoman Postel. All right. Ward 1? Aye. Ward 2? Aye. Ward 3? Aye. Ward 4? Aye. Ward 5? Aye. Ward 6?
Aye.
Ward 7? Aye. That motion passes unanimously. We are now going to convene into closed session. Yes, council, let's be downstairs at 7:50.
Someone going to call me?